Hi, and welcome back to documentary film. And we are going to be looking at Module 11 this week, which is the title is Popularity or The Popularity of Documentaries. And they certainly have been over the last, say, 20 years or so, in particular because of someone named Michael Moore. So we're going to take a look at Michael Moore's Roger and Me. That's the film that put him on the map, and he's made others since: Bowling for Columbine, Fahrenheit 9/11, and a series of other films that we know to be very popular because we hear about Michael Moore really kind of across the board on talk shows, in print, in reviews, and so on. And Michael Moore is certainly an opinionated person we'll say, for the left, but he's able to kind of parlay that opinion into films that are, at the very least, thought-provoking. And they're done in such a way that they represent a particular type of film, which is that participatory mode that we've talked about before. The expository mode, typically we don't see the voiceover, the person doing the narration may or may not be the filmmaker, but that voice basically controls the narrative, organizes the information, it advances the narrative so that we always know where we are, we know what's going on. Now, what Michael Moore and others that use that participatory mode, what they do is they actually get involved, directly involved in the making of the film. And quite often, in the case of Michael Moore, he is not only in the film, but the film is about a quest of some sort or another. And in the case of Roger and Me, it's simply Michael Moore trying to meet Roger Smith. It's a very simple premise. And as a matter of fact, it works almost as a Hollywood narrative film. So if there's a film in our entire sort of corpus or our oeuvre of documentary films, Michael Moore's Roger and Me is probably the film that looks closest and feels the closest to a typical Hollywood film because it has a clear narrative. Michael Moore is hoping to speak to Roger Smith. Very simple. But along the way, there's all kinds of detours that we're going to talk about, but that's the essential structure. So the performative mode, participatory mode as well, but performative is where the filmmaker actually is a character in the story. So that is a mode of documentary that Bill Nichols talks about in his 6 modes. And we've seen different examples of direct cinema, observational cinema, expository, self-reflexive. And now we're going to take a look at performative. And so it is, first of all, the direct opposite of observational. Typically, the observational mode is the kind of fly on the wall. But in this case, it's kind of fly in the ointment, right? The presence of Michael Moore is going to cause some problems for people because the way in which he works is he tries to tie together a story where he's after information, he's after a particular person, he's trying to uncover things, right? So it is not, unobtrusive. It's quite the opposite. It is very intrusive. And that's why we call it the performative mode. The filmmaker is a direct participant in the action, in the narrative, and that person's actions actually develop the narrative further. So the most important idea here is that the filmmaker's own involvement with the subject is front and center. And in this particular case, Michael Moore is basically someone who worked at a GM plant in Flint, Michigan, lost his job, and he just wanted to ask Roger Smith, I keep wanting to call him Roger Moore, but Roger Smith, why that is. Why did he have to leave? Very simple question. But the whole premise behind the film, the existence of the film, is his desire to speak to Roger Smith, who at that point was the CEO of GM. So the performative documentary is the appearance of Michael Moore in his own film, but also advancing the narrative. If you were to be philosophical about it, you would say that he has agency, right? He has agency in that he is an agent of his own existence, of his own history. And in this particular case, what he's trying to do is do something really simple. He's just trying to meet a guy, right? But that's what the whole film is about. So in terms of focusing on the experiences of the filmmaker, Michael Moore has a direct and vested interest in the closing of this GM plant because he talked about his parents working there, his entire family worked there, he worked there. So he has a vested interest in finding out what happened. And of course, these stories are very personal to these individuals. This is kind of where the difference is between cinema verité, which is, cinema truth, where the filmmaker is part of it. But typically it goes as far as them simply, perhaps being seen on screen asking questions, but they're not trying to direct and advance the narrative in a specific way. The performative mode does. The involvement of the filmmaker is a direct response to how the film unfolds. So the films are personal to these people. They have direct experience in what's going on. They're, as a result, really kind of the best people to tell the story because it has affected them in the most direct kind of way. Now, the opening sequences, and as you've noticed, every time I've asked you to watch films, to really pay attention to the way they open, because they say a lot about the way in which the film establishes a premise. Last week's film, Capturing the Friedmans, it starts with home movies. Here we have the same thing, right? We have home movies kind of setting the stage of who this person is. So the opening sequence here is quite different from what we typically expect in an expository documentary. These home movies are rather silly. It's Michael Moore. It's the director as a child with his sister and his family. He was kind of goofing around and so on. They're home movies. That's what they're meant to be. But it kind of sets a stage like, this is personal, right? This is kind of a personal story. So Moore begins to describe his life, his experiences in Flint, Michigan. He acknowledges in the initial sort of introduction that his perspective is somewhat limited. Yes, he has direct experience in it, but his knowledge is limited because he doesn't claim to know everything about the ins and outs of corporate management and the way in which corporations think about doing things. So he admits to that, but that is kind of part of the charm because he, by doing that, kind of speaks on behalf of a lot of people, because the closing of a plant is not the first time, let me rephrase that. The closing of the GM plant in Flint, it has been the beginning of many plants closing throughout North America. And businesses either moving south to Mexico or further south to South America, overseas. This is something that happens regularly. So Michael Moore is kind of the everyman, or the every person, right? It used to be called every man, but every person, because men and women have worked in factories for many, many years. And so the limited perspective that Moore has is also part of his charm, because he is very much like you and I. If we had worked in a factory, as I have, and the doors were closed, and we accepted it where I used to work, we accepted it as just a simple fact. We weren't that concerned as to why. We kind of knew why, because the company made it clear to us, right? It's a financial decision. That's all it was. Now, whether it impacted the people's lives to a greater or lesser degree, is really not part of the equation when a corporation does that. But what's interesting about this film is this is kind of early on. Plants didn't used to close as often as they do, and this was something very shocking. So Moore's performative documentary presents to us his limited knowledge of what's going on, but also the privilege that he has of having been someone directly affected by the closing of the plant. So the question becomes, all right, this is a filmmaker. This is someone clearly knows how to construct a film, seems to have some kind of knowledge in terms of structure and narrative, is pretty well a half-decent writer because he seems to know what to ask and who to ask. So how is he depicted in this early film? Well, I mentioned it already, a kind of, every person. And so that characterization, because I've stressed many times in the film, in fact, this one and every other film, what's called a persona. People present to others a certain persona of who they would like to be perceived as. So Michael Moore could have presented himself any number of ways, but he decides to play the kind of, regular guy, right? It's just kind of a regular Joe. So the character really works well with the film because it looks like here's this guy that has got this dogged determination. He's not the smartest guy in the room, but he's tenacious. He's gonna meet this guy no matter what. So it's that tenacity that we really kind of find endearing with him. But really, he's sort of a klutz figure, right? He has a certain lack of expertise, that he presents to us. But what it does is that he now has a degree of common sense, right? Because he is a regular person, quote unquote, he should be, allowed a degree of common sense. Like, this isn't right. What they've done is wrong here, right? That's a kind of a common sense response. That's not sort of taking into account the intricacies of, global managements and the way corporations think globally rather than locally. And what's happening here is because it is a performative film, and Michael Moore is one of the main characters, if not the main character, right? Because it is called Roger and Me, and he's the me. He's still pretty important. But what is happening is the film is not objective to the degree that it would be factual so that we could believe everything that's being said. Now, I'm not saying that Michael Moore is lying. What I'm saying is that it works more like an editorial, right? Here are my subjective opinions as to what's been happening. So it presents to us an opinion, a judgment, an evaluation of what's gone on. And of course, this is very negative because the closing of the GM plant in Flint, Michigan was probably one of the worst things that could have happened in that town. And more recently, over the last 10 years, they've had a serious water crisis where the water quality is absolutely the worst. And of course, nobody wants to do anything about it, and they keep blaming everybody else and so on. But that's maybe a whole other movie for Michael Moore. Right now, we're going to focus on Roger and Me. So that kind of style, where it's sort of using common sense, it's kind of an opinion piece, like an editorial. Michael Moore also, clearly states that he's not an expert in this field, but he would just like to have Roger Smith answer a few questions. That's really it. Very limited scope, but also enough for a movie to last an hour and a half and still keep our interest. Now, this kind of filmmaking and this kind of journalism has a name. It's called gonzo journalism. Now, gonzo journalism at its worst is just like off the cuff, sort of flying along by the seat of your pants kind of journalism. It's usually first person. There's no claims to objectivity. When we say claims to objectivity, doesn't mean we're going to lie to you. It means I have a vested interest in this story because it has affected me personally. And that really is what Michael Moore is doing. Now, whether it's gonzo journalism, which is what Pauline Kael had accused him of, it's yes, to a degree. But I've seen much worse examples where it clearly refers to Moore's work is that it is first person, right? It's participatory. It's about him. It's about how he responded to the closing of the plant. So are there claims of objectivity? No. I mean, there is factual information in the film. We talk about, the amounts of money that was saved, what people did. I mean, these are facts that can be proven, but there is no clear claim for objectivity because that's not kind of Michael Moore's thing. I want to tell you how this affected me, quote unquote. That's what he wants to do. So if that's the case, and we have members of the audience, laughing at ordinary working people, and really, this is not what Michael Moore is trying to make us do, because that is very condescending and looking down on people. I think what Moore is trying to do is level the playing field and saying it's us versus them. And us is this inclusive group that includes myself, people I used to work with, people he stayed in touch with, because we see a lot of workmates that he goes back to visit. Some do okay, some do not so okay. Now, is that gonzo journalism, or is that something that does not claim to be objective? It's more so the second, because gonzo journalism can be really flying by the seat of your pants kind of stuff that Hunter S. Thompson would have written. So if you don't know who Hunter S. Thompson is, Google him. He is the king of gonzo journalism. Now, Pauline Kael asks a question, right? Are we encouraged to take this stance as audience members and laugh at these poor people? Well, Personally, I don't think so, because the film tries to portray these individuals as really victims, right? Victims of this financial decision that GM made to close the plant. Now, do we laugh at them? Because some people end up doing some pretty strange jobs. We should, at the very least, feel sorry for them, because the opportunities that they've had or had before to work at a plant and, get a decent wage and benefits and a retirement package, that's all gone. That's completely gone. But do we laugh at them? No, I don't think Moore wants us to. If he wants us to do anything, I think he wants us to laugh at just the utter greed and the utter contempt that the CEOs and upper management have towards their workers. I think those are the people that he wants us to laugh at. So Moore, as much as he lacks objectivity and participates in the story, he still structures the film like a kind of essay, right? He has an introductory statement, he has body paragraphs, he has conclusions, and he has a main point, right? He has a thesis. And the thesis is the closing of this plant has made Flint, Michigan suffer to such a degree that many people have left. There's maybe half as many people living there now, let's say 25 years later. There were maybe 250,000 people living there when it was sort of going full out and the plant was there. And it's around maybe 100,000 people that are living there now. So the thesis that he has, which is that the closing of this plant has been a detriment to that city, he has tons of proof, lots of proof of people, being kicked out of their apartments and their houses, losing their houses, foreclosing on their houses, the sheriff showing up and locking doors on them. So there's the proof of his idea, right? These people will suffer. Here is what suffering looks like. And one of the ways in which he does it, and this is the formal aspect, he really does a good job cross-cutting. Now, what is that? Cross-cutting is cutting between two different spaces, two discrete spaces, or it's cutting between an image on one side and sound or audio on the other. A couple of times we hear a Beach Boys song, "Wouldn't It Be Nice?" And it's a traveling shot down a street of all these boarded up homes. So is it ironic? Is it satirical? Is it parodic? No, it's kind of sad, right? So the irony is really ratcheted up by having such a sunny, funny, fluffy song by the Beach Boys and the depressing landscape of these boarded up homes. So not only does Moore present backup information, right, to back up his main thesis, but he does it formally. He does it visually. So he really brings home the point that, things aren't nice anymore. Things are really tough. So how does he construct his thesis, and what exactly is he arguing? Okay, well, what he's arguing is that the closing of the plant has been hurtful to the economy, to the people that are there. Some people just don't have the willpower or even the skills to be able to turn around and say, okay, well, I'm going to try doing this. Very few people seem in the film to have done better, right? You might move sort of sideways or horizontally and maybe find something that it pays the same, but the job might be kind of more crappy. Very few people move up the ladder. And if anything, the only person that successfully does it is Michael Moore himself. He used to work in a GM plant, and now he's worth millions as a documentary filmmaker. So what is really odd is the film, Michael Moore's life ultimately undercuts the film, saying, this has been very hurtful. Yes, it has. But Michael Moore had the wherewithal to move away, to find, sort of greener pastures, as they say, to find something else to do. But at least here, the thesis is that the closing of this plant has been detrimental to the city and to the opportunities, economic opportunities that people have had. And so here the images illustrate the commentary. But at times, they're very ironic, right? They're very contradictory, but they're contradictory for a purpose, right? To highlight the fact that there are many people there who are unemployed, and yet, there's all this vast amounts of wealth being spent by, of course, people who can afford to, and the disjunction between these two ideas is what makes those points get driven home to the viewer. So Some of the solutions presented by people in the film, some of them are a little odd, maybe not laughable, but we have to then turn around and look at these people and say, okay, what opportunities did they have before? Have they been able to make things work for them? And for the most part, at the very most, like I say, they seem to just move sideways. Okay, so there's a whole range of things that we see. There's a parade at one point that is, something that used to be a big deal, and now, of course, the parade is much sadder. It really kind of is watered down. There's very few people there. There's at one point there's a newlywed show, like it was on the road. This was a show back in the 70s, I think, and might have been done by the mid 80s. But we have this fair, where the newlywed show is that is hosted by Bob Eubanks, and Bob Eubanks, a former citizen of Flint, Michigan. Now he's gone off to green pastures, and really that's what I mean when the success of Michael Moore's life kind of undercuts the idea that he presents here, which is that people have no futures. Well, he lucked out. Right? He had a future. Now, others maybe, if you were to go back and visit him 25 years later, maybe in a better place. But certainly what we want to keep in mind is the people that are there, how they were coping, right? How they managed to cope. We see, for example, a theater trying to at least help people by saying, look, we're going to sell half-price tickets, to employees who've been laid off. Okay, that's great. But does that put food on the table? No, it doesn't, but people do need to be entertained periodically to take their minds off things. There's scenes in the Hyatt Hotel, the kind of money spent for the Hyatt Hotel, which basically went belly up. So money was being brought into the town, and then when GM dried up and went away, the money dried up, so did the people. So did these projects, to improve the future. The Water Street Pavilion is another one. An auto world. So they're diversions. They're simply spectacles, right? All of these things are simply spectacles to take people's minds off what is going on. So the question is, do these solutions, address the problem? No, of course not. Do they prolong it? No, not really. But they are diversions, and that's really all they're doing. Now, some of the different jobs that people end up in. One person ends up working at Taco Bell and finds out just how hard it is to work at minimum wage. Another woman ends up as an Amway salesman. A couple end up as prison guards because at this point they're building a new prison. Oh, big surprise there. There's always work to be done with building new prisons. And these are the kinds of jobs that present themselves, but really are they solutions? I mean, it's work and it's money, but do you get the same sort of satisfaction, the camaraderie that they would have had at that GM plant? So if you get another job and you start training, is there really a future, right? And that's kind of what we see with some of the individuals that are there. So the fundamental problem, right, with these solutions is that many of these have no guarantee, right? There's no guarantee that you will be able to last there forever. Probably little, if any, health benefits, but that's right across the board in America. It's even gotten worse. The pay probably is not very good. There's probably nothing that resembles a pension package that would have been available to people at that point at GM. So it's not a pretty picture, right? For sure. So I mentioned before the cross-cutting technique, which is a key feature of Moore's style. He tries to undercut what we hear with what we see, or vice versa. But there's always a disjunction, right? It's not expository at this point. It's not even self-reflexive. It's clearly done to undercut what we're either seeing or hearing. But it is a key feature of his style, and you'll see it a number of times. The one, again, that sticks in my mind is the Beach Boys song, which is sunny and fluffy, and it's just all these boarded up buildings. So it really kind of drives home the point that, no, things are not looking up. Things are rather pretty bleak. So does it have an influence on us as viewers? Absolutely. Because we're registering both of these, the well, we'll call it the dichotomy, right? But at least the disjunction between what we see and hear, whether what we're hearing could be a pronouncement, by a CEO or some kind of official pronouncement, and then it's undercut by Moore's visuals. So he does this quite often. Now, at the worst case scenario is it, we'll get pissed off because it is an emotional response, more so than an intellectual response. I talked a few weeks ago about Eisenstein and his overtonal montage, where two images brought together, create in our minds a new idea. Well, here, it's not so much creating a new idea. It's not really an intellectual response. We get pissed off, right? And that's what Moore wants us to do, because he wants to push our buttons and make us realize these people have lost a lot, right? And himself included. Now, along with cross-cutting, there's something else about Michael Moore's style, which does rub some people up the wrong way, because what Moore is constantly doing throughout the film is surprising people with interviews. And nothing makes someone look really foolish than jamming a microphone on their face and you start asking questions. They're not prepared. They don't know what you're saying, what you're talking about. And they look really foolish, or they look like they're trying to hide something. And Moore knows that that's the strategy that he should adopt, to talk to people that really, kind of when you think about it, did they have a personal hand in shutting down a GM plan? Short answer is no, right? So you have these surprise, gotcha interviews with Miss America, Bob Eubanks, Pat Boone. I mean, none of these people had anything to do with the closing of the plant. But what I think Moore is trying to do here is to point out that some people simply just don't think about what's happened, right? They go about their jobs, doing their thing. Remember, they're all celebrities, right? That's what celebrities do, right? They bring joy and fun to people. But do they really have anything to do with the closing of the plant? No, they don't. Now, Pat Boone was a spokesperson for GM, but really, did he sit in on the board meetings? No. So why do we have these interviews here at all, right? Are ambush interviews fair to the subject, fair to us? Do they advance the narrative? Or are they kind of fun to watch, right? I think it's kind of the last one. They're kind of fun to watch, to see people squirm, right? To see people try to talk their way out of a situation that they've been basically ambushed, and to try to say something smart. And Moore knows that. Moore knows that these things work really well because they make these people look foolish. But let's not kid ourselves. None of those individuals had anything to do with the closing of the plant. It's, again, kind of like a bit of a diversion, a bit of a spectacle. So we have to ask ourselves, if that's the case, is this a reflexive documentary? Is it aware of its inability to capture the truth because the visuals undercut the audio, or vice versa? So is it reflexive, or is it something else? Well, it's not reflexive in the sense that the Fog of War was, where the images really go a long way to undercut that official narrative. And what Robert McNamara was presenting in that film, in The Fog of War, was what he considered to be the official narrative of something. And of course, as we've talked about, he's also trying to rewrite history, right? He's trying to revise history to cast him in a better light. And what Errol Morris is doing is undercutting that revision of history with images that say, no, this is the way it happened. You were there, you caused this. So here, we don't have the same degree of reflexivity. It's not as polished, right? It's not as expertise. So instead, what we're having is these moments where what we hear is undercut by what we see. And that disjunction is supposed to get us upset, right? Morally upset or ethically upset. But it's not calling it into attention truth claims. Those homes are boarded up. And you could have very sad music, that we hear as we're seeing this, as people are getting locked out of their own houses because they can't afford to pay for them anymore. You put sad music on there, and it's tragic. It's a tragic thing. But you put a Beach Boys song on there, the tone is very different. Is it reflexive? No. Is it ironic? Yes. Right? Is it meant to upset us and sort of push emotional buttons? Yes, it does. So what's happening here is, this decaying city that we're seeing, Flint, Michigan, that is really what Michael Moore wants to highlight. The fact that this city is being viewed by us through Michael Moore's eyes, because he has lived there all of his life. He remembers what it used to look like. And we would see home movies of, parades where there'd be thousands of people there. And now it's like this just sad, pathetic, excuse for a parade. And visually, we can see what he means very, very quickly. So yes, there's a kind of mocking tone. There certainly is a mocking tone when it comes to these ambush gotcha interviews, because here, yes, I would agree with Pauline Kael and say that's kind of gonzo journalism at its worst, but it's also to point out that there are certain people that, one, may be indirectly tied to the story, but they're not the shareholders who chose to close that plant. So that's what we need to remember. So that mocking tone, we have to think about morality and ethics, misplaced priorities like, hey, let's have a parade. Hey, let's have the newlywed game come to Flint. Well, who the hell cares, right? What difference will that make? And that's where the common sense comes in. And that's where Michael Moore comes in and says, yeah, I would agree as well. So as much as Moore has been very successful, he has had some criticisms in his work. A.O. Scott, quote, the slippery logic, tendentious grandstanding, and outright demagoguery on display in Bowling for Columbine. Here, the kind of, every person sort of jlubby kind of, I don't really know, I just want to find out, really graded people in the wrong way, right? That's where there were some misfires. Now, still a very powerful film, but some people believe in guns, right? They're against any form of gun control, which is really what the main thesis was of this film, Bowling for Columbine, that is. So these are quotes. I would think that Scott probably is a gun aficionado, or at least someone that believes in the Second Amendment and says that anything that disturbs that is anti-American. So of course they're going to go after him. Jeremy Rhodes, quote, just as the Nazis had Leni Riefenstahl, the Democrats have Michael Moore to spew their propaganda. Wow. Okay. What can you really tell us what you're thinking? It's pretty straightforward here. Or Phoebe Flowers. There are better, subtler, and more respectable ways to condemn the actions of the Bush administration than Moore's hyperbolic hysteria. Now, these people, as you can imagine, because Michael Moore is left of center as a Democrat, he used to work for Mother Jones, which is a very respected left-wing magazine, a monthly magazine that's been out for years and years. These people, Scott, Rhodes, and Flowers, are on the other side, right? They are more on the right wing. And Michael Moore drives them nuts because they don't like to have their dirty laundry aired in public. And Michael Moore knows that. And so he gets under their skin very, very quickly. Now, the strategies that he uses are the very things that they hate because they're kind of so really obvious. And when you walk around as a kind of like, I don't really know what's going on, I'm going to kind of look into it, it makes him sound like he's not very intelligent. Clearly he is. He's a very good and accomplished documentary filmmaker and has been a writer for years. Like I said, he started in Mother Jones. But at the same time, why is it that only the right can have their own pundits, whether it's, Rush Limbaugh, John O'Reilly, whatever his name is. Half these people don't even remember anymore. Some of them are dead. These people are there. Why is it that they're only the right wing can have propaganda pundits, but every time we have someone coming from the left, that they've got to be shot down, like not literally, but they have to be shot down because, the right doesn't like to have these controversial topics brought to the attention of the average person, but presented in such a way that you literally shake your head going like, why haven't we fixed this? Well, that's the problem. That's the problem with Moore, is because he does his job very well. Yes, he's got his critics, but the critics typically talk about the content. They rarely talk about the form. And when we are here in this class, we need to speak about the form. And the form is very effective. When you can undercut the words of a person with images that are literally the opposite of what they say, what happens? We don't trust the words. We don't trust the speaker. And Moore knows that, and Moore uses that as a very strategic little device, like almost like a rhetorical device in his films, to undercut what these people are saying. So we can ask ourselves, is Moore fair to his subjects? Well, to the subjects that he wishes to bring down a few pegs, no. right? Surprise interviews, ambush interviews, gotcha interviews, whatever you want to call them. He's very good at those, right? He'll chase after people to get information. But think about it. Even the chasing after someone, even if he doesn't speak to them, presents that person in a bad light. Not more, but the person he's trying to interview, because they're trying to avoid him. And when you're trying to avoid someone, maybe you're hiding something, right? And all these things visually work, and they really kind of become cumulative, because there are several people, trust me, that Michael Moore tries to speak to all through the film, and they kind of do the same thing. So without them even stopping to speak to someone, they've already shot themselves in the foot. They're already guilty by just not saying a word. So there are things that Moore has used in the past that are kind of questionable. I think, Bowling for Columbine, he goes to a bank that hand out guns. As it turns out that no, the banks do not hand out guns on the premises. They will send you one maybe, or you can pick it up somewhere else. But it's presenting the idea that you open a bank account in this particular bank, not in this film, but in Bowling for Columbine, and you get a free gun. That's outrageous. But in the US, right, they love guns. This is not strange. So the kinds of things that he presents to us, we need to be very careful and ask ourselves, is this really what's going on? Another one, Moore comes to Canada, opens up doors in a suburban neighborhood, claiming that Canadians don't lock their doors. Well, we do. Most of us do. We don't know. We don't know if he lucked out. He just walked into someone's house. So we still need to be careful as to what the images actually are, and more importantly, how they are combined with audio. And Moore does this very well, but let's not emotionally, cave to this movie. We still need to be objective and fair-minded. Now, that's not to say that what Moore is saying, that he's lying to us. He isn't. But it is a certain style of filmmaking that, because it is participatory, because it does present ideas of common sense, it does push certain emotional buttons. And it does it very well, which is why the right hates Michael Moore. Okay, so that's Roger and Me, which is our feature presentation. I'm going to come back in just a moment to talk about Morgan Spurlock's Super Size Me and a bit more about participatory. Back in a moment. Okay, we're back with the second half of these slides here, and what I want to do is talk a little bit about Super Size Me by Morgan Spurlock. This is not our feature presentation, Roger and Me is, but what I would like you to do is watch, there's about a 7-minute condensed version of the film, which will give you kind of the highlights. But again, the same structure, at least on the surface, but we're going to kind of go in and unpack it a little bit. It's worth watching if you can find a copy of it. It's ultimately really hard to watch at times as the director basically, sacrifices his health for a whole month to kind of prove a point. But let's kind of look at some of the ideas that have been sort of raised as a result of this film. The first one here is from Radley Balco. Many critics thought the documentary had unfairly targeted the world's largest restaurant chain, implying that the obese were victims of a careless corporate giant. People are responsible for what they eat, not restaurants. The problem with a McDonald's-only diet isn't what's on the menu, but the choices made from it. So that's a valid claim, because what happens in the film is Morgan Spurlock, you probably have heard of this film already, basically eats nothing but McDonald's food for a month to show how bad the diet is. And sure, it's true. It's not something we didn't know before. We know that we've got to watch, how much crap food that we eat. So that's the main premise, right? That's really all he wants to show. Now, McDonald's people certainly heard about the film and did comment on it. And they argued that the author intentionally consumed about 5,000 calories per day and purposely did not exercise. So again, the food is there. No one's cramming it down anyone's throat. McDonald's do make this food available. But remember how I talked about agency before with Michael Moore. We still have agency. We still can control, the history of our actions. We can still create our own world. But here what's going on is Morgan Spurlock is saying, well, what if somebody didn't know any better? Or what if they couldn't afford anything else, right? That doesn't sort of come into the picture. He simply wants to show, how bad the food is. But again, it isn't something we don't already know. A third of the calories of the 5,000 comes just from sugar. So the movie, for example, doesn't discuss the fact that there are diet soft drinks. If something gets supersized, give me the Coke. Don't give me the Diet Coke. Give me the full-on 150% whatever sugar. So in his defense, Spurlock said, look, he was just trying to act like the average person. What an average diet would be for a regular eater at McDonald's, but also for someone who gets little to no exercise, which is not far off. Because there are lots of individuals who choose not to exercise. They may watch what they eat, but maybe they can't afford to join a gym. So other than walking around, that's all the exercise they can afford to get. They could be super busy, but this is something that Spurlock does not factor into his narrative. He's simply saying that this food is really bad. I'm going to, every time somebody asks me, can I supersize that for you? I'm going to say yes. Look what happens to me. Well, again, we're kind of not surprised. So Roger Ebert, that we've heard from before, he said, of course, it is possible to eat responsibly at McDonald's, as spokesmen for the chain never tire of reminding us. Fast food is simply one element of a balanced nutritional plan. Of course, it's the unbalanced element. Unless you order the fish fillet sandwich with no mayonnaise or one of those little salads with a low-cal dressing, then you'll be fine, except for the refined flour in the bun, the high intake of sodium. Eating responsibly at McDonald's is like going to a strip club for the iced tea. We know what we're in for. We're not in there expecting, French cuisine. This is not, veggie burgers or whatever. That's changed since, but we know what we're getting. But would we supersize everything and get into the situation that Morgan Spurlock finds himself in? Hopefully the answer is no. But it is a question or questions that have been brought against Spurlock's film because it is not the norm. I don't think anyone would eat every single day at McDonald's unless for some reason they had to. That's entirely possible. But the average person wouldn't do that. Maybe they don't exercise, but they would not be scarfing down a ton of McDonald's food every single day. So there's criticisms against Spurlock fair. To a certain degree they are, because he does present a very particular kind of approach to fast food. Gobble down as much as you can. Well, every time they ask me to supersize something, I say yes. Well, where's the agency of a person going, no, I'm good with, the small. I'm fine with that. Okay. Secondly, is Spurlock's experiment, the average American diet? Well, sometimes, not all the time. Again, has a lot to do with the kind of money that parents may have to spend on their kids. And these days, if you go to McDonald's, what used to cost a few dollars costs way more money. So would McDonald's be a place that parents would take their kids regularly? Probably more and more, no. So what is the film saying about corporate responsibility and personal responsibility? The emphasis appears to be, according to Spurlock, that corporations don't care. They will sell you poison if they can get away with it. We don't know. Corporations are known to have done some pretty horrible things, but ultimately, at the end of the day, is it our responsibility or is it the corporation's responsibility to monitor what we eat? A lot of people know that smoking cigarettes is, it's bad for you. Many people have stopped. It's a very difficult addiction to get over, but a lot of people knew from the get-go that it was bad. So they chose never to start smoking. So the cigarette companies still exist, right? They're still trying to sell this product in any way they can. But we also have a personal responsibility to ourselves and our health and our well-being to say no. And Spurlock does not include that in the film. Otherwise, the film simply wouldn't exist or it wouldn't work in the way that it does. Now, when you attack McDonald's, that's one of the great institutions in used to be North America, now around the world. It's a term that can be used in a very derogatory way when we talk about the McDonaldization of something. That means the general sameness around the world of, whether it's a piece of steak or a car or something. It can be used both in a good and a bad way, because McDonald's is really kind of on the level of Disney. It's something that has been part of a lot of kids, their childhood. To go to McDonald's was a big thing. And so generations of parents have been taking their kids to McDonald's. There's a kind of nostalgia attached to it, to eat at a place that your parents may have eaten when they were kids and their parents took them there. Again, that's not that component of the McDonald's experience that Spurlock is interested in, really, or does he wish to pursue it? He wishes to show us that this food is really bad, and if you eat as much as I do, you're going to get sick. Well, oh my God, stop the presses. I didn't know that. Of course we did. So does the film prove something new? Does it present new information? Really, short answer, no. So the McDonald's that are around now, they're kind of the playgrounds, there are toys, there are different kinds of signs that are pointing to the fact that McDonald's is aware that you don't have to have their food. You can get sort of diet versions. I don't know if McDonald's have veggie burgers. I know they do at Harvey's. That's another sort of an awareness that people should have a choice. And what is that? That's a corporation acknowledging that we have agency, right? That we can make a choice and we can decide what to do. So rather than saying, no, we're never going to make it, because you know what? If McDonald's doesn't have veggie burgers and this other place does, I'm going to go over there, right? So it becomes a decision that corporations need to make as to what kinds of people they're going to be bringing in. Now, Morgan Spurlock's film really could not have existed without Michael Moore's work, because it has really a lot of the same sort of qualities. The participatory filmmaking, the fact that Spurlock is the main character in the film, right? He's supersizing me, himself, Roger and me. This is the filmmaker. So there's lots of graphics, there's all kinds of other things that are going on. But what's happening here is you've got, an individual trying to prove a point regarding, the bad quality of the food. And he says, look, this is Spurlock saying that, this needs to be said to people. But the style in which it is made really owes a lot to that participatory Michael Moore style of filmmaking. And Ed Gonzalez, for example, says Spurlock's take on the McDonald's Happy Meal, it's for those who don't want to take the Frederick Wiseman diet. Now, we know who Frederick Wiseman is, right? We've seen one of his films, which is, right, Did He Cut Follies? That's heavy going. But with Spurlock, it's pretty kind of zippy and fluffy and fun until kind of he starts getting some serious problems with his health. But it's a very kind of fast and loose, off the cuff kind of style of filmmaking. There's nothing as deliberate as a Frederick Wiseman film, and that's really all he's saying here. So does the style of the film reflect the kind of morality, the moral dilemmas that McDonald's uses in advertising its food? Well, it depends. Again, if you want to acknowledge that we have absolutely no agency in our life, that we are going to blindly consume everything put in front of us, then yes, Morgan Spurlock's film would be a warning. But we already know that a lot of the food is bad for us. We choose to eat selectively. We'll have the occasional Big Mac. I haven't had one in, I think, maybe 25 years, and I wouldn't turn around and scream at someone that is going to have one. Have at it. It's your choice. You've chosen to do that. I've chosen not to. Now, having said that, I probably have not been inside a McDonald's for quite a few years. But again, I wouldn't burn one to the ground. Other people have a choice. And that kind of choice, that kind of decision making is something Spurlock kind of ignores in the making of his film, because that's what gives it its impact. Like, be careful because the corporations are out to get you. So, yes, the corporations maybe should take some responsibility, and some of them have. And that's really what Michael Moore is doing in Roger and Me. He's putting the responsibility on the corporation for ignoring the plight of the very employees that were ready to give their entire lives to work there. Now, by comparison, Spurlock simply just turns the camera on himself, right? He talks about McDonald's, of course, where the supersizing starts, but he turns the camera on himself, which is the opposite of what Moore does. It is called still Roger and Me. The camera is as much, or the story is as much about Roger Smith and his decision along with his shareholders to close the plant. So that's something quite different. Now, because of that, Spurlock does not address the issues that I've raised. The fact that we can make choices. We could eat occasionally at McDonald's. We could still eat healthy otherwise. We could exercise on a sort of semi-regular basis. None of these things are offered. So by way of a solution, Spurlock's film kind of is somewhat lacking. The only solution is don't ever eat at McDonald's. Well, some people think, you know what? I can keep a balance between going there and having the fish fillet or whatever it is you like, but you don't have to have it every day. So the fact that McDonald's is exercising little or no ethical responsibility is kind of secondary to, and this quote I really like, the main hypocrisy here is that Spurlock takes on McDonald's for exercising little or no ethical responsibility when selling burgers, just as the director needlessly is getting fat in order to sell a documentary, right? He's going to harm himself in order to make a documentary. Now, is that purposeful? Is that a very smart thing to do? Well, he got his documentary made, and we've talked about it, but really, he's telling us something we already knew, right? So Spurlock's body, his more and more obese body, his increasingly sick body, that's the message. Don't do this because you're going to end up looking like me. But again, we already knew these things. Now, having said that, it's still an important message to present because there is an alarming rate of obesity in America, and people do need to be more careful and more mindful of the food that they're eating. So if the film does anything, perhaps the target of McDonald's is less important than attacking our eating habits, because our eating habits are really the reason why people are obese. Now, if you don't have a whole lot of money, you're going to be stuck eating probably a lot of food that are high in carbs. Well, that's kind of an easy target, isn't it? Because a lack of money to buy proper food, and if you don't believe me, take a look at the same item organically and regular. The organic food, which is better for you, often twice the price. So you have to have money in your pocket, extra money, to be able to eat as well as perhaps you would like to. But the issue still is our eating habits and how they could be controlled by finances, by the amount of money you have, how close a grocery store is to where you live. These things are still really important and don't factor into the film. So the film is very specific as to what it's trying to do. So that's really the case. There is kind of a spectacle that's being created by Spurlock, as he gets increasingly sicker and more demented and cranky and obnoxious. It's a spectacle. But really at the same time, it's highlighting that, if we don't think seriously about our eating habits, we could be going down the same road. Now, the results of the film, and we don't know whether the film caused this, but we know that McDonald's has since dropped this whole supersize issue after the film was received, and it was fairly successful. But we don't know, right? We don't know whether McDonald's were planning on doing this, but certainly if it was on the table as a maybe, right? Probably got accelerated after the success of the film. Like, we need to get rid of this because it's just going to make us look worse. So whether they thought of it beforehand, since the film, the whole supersize issue is gone. Now, McDonald's were also offering healthier choices, salads, fish fillets, and so on. And again, none of this is mentioned in the film. It's not as if the film was made in 1972. It was made not that long ago. And so these things, and I'm just using McDonald's as an example. I also mentioned Harvey's, having veggie burgers, and they can sell you salads. So you can eat sort of more healthily than you used to because of these kinds of things. A growing concern with the obesity issue in North America. So none of this was really a response to the film in a direct way. Because trust me, when corporations make decisions, they focus group the hell out of something, and they make 100% sure it's the right thing to do, because they could stand to lose a lot of money. So did the movie Super Size Me change opinions in McDonald's? Maybe 10%. But after a focus group and another one, oh yeah, you know what, Super Size, it's got a negative connotation. Let's get rid of that. So they did. Let's offer some healthy choices, veggie burgers and salads. Okay, good idea. Or maybe, when somebody gets something, let's put the topping in a separate container so they can control how much they put on. All these things matter, but were they direct responses of the film? We don't know. It's hard to tell. But I'm going to say the way the corporations are run, maybe the movie had 10% to do with it, because these decisions are done carefully and rationally and always with the bottom line as part of the final equation. Okay, so that's participatory filmmaking, sort of popular narratives, popular documentaries, Super Size Me, virtually everything that Michael Moore has done has been successful to one degree or another, and that's kind of essentially the focus that we wanted to put on the films for this week. But funny enough, the ones that are really popular are the ones that use that participatory mode. That's kind of the main idea that I want to present here. So that's that. We're going to see each other on Wednesday for the Zoom, talk a little bit more about the essay that's coming up, maybe a little bit about the final exam that's coming up, which would be, we're going to be into April. So let's say, it's going to be in about 3 weeks. So we'll see you very shortly. Take care, and we'll see you on Wednesday.